Hi, everybody. How are you? This is Timothy McAleer live from Camarillo, California, with my brother Kevin McAleer live from Berlin, Germany. And we are going to continue our 1 hour video chats, occasional chats on great literature or even non great literature, um, as the case may be. The last time we were here was probably about 8 or 9 months ago, and we decided to take a break for some time, and we've decided to get back together again on this very popular series, as I say somewhat whimsically. Um, but anyway, we've covered quite a few authors. As Kevin has said, it's kind of like a course on American literature from 1900 to 1950 when you consider all the Jack London we covered, all the Ernest Hemingway we covered, the F. Scott Fitzgerald, and so on and so forth. We also have done a little bit of literature beyond the 50s, like I forget the guy's name,
Bret
who
Easton Ellis, Less Than Zero, for example.
Freddie Sanilis. That's Bret Easton Ellis. Yes, 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 Bret Easton Ellis. And what was the name? Fanton, John Fanton, or something like that.
John Fonte, which was in 1938, Ask the
And
Dust.
and we did some William Saroyan.
Right, also 1930s, 1934. So we
And
we basically our locus was the first, as you said, half of the 20th century, and then we slipped down to Mr. Clemens for his two great works, Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, in our final two editions of this podcast.
okay, so we did reach back into the 19th century briefly with Mark Twain, and we're going to be reaching back into that century, or right at the turn of the century, with Joseph Conrad, a British writer, of course, who was immigrant from Poland. Now, Kevin says he's reading a biography of Conrad, a definitive biography, so he may have some nice background to illuminate about Mr. Conrad from that perspective. But the book we decided to start with here is called Lord Jim, a pretty famous title. Also, a movie starring Peter O'Toole, I believe, in 1966, directed by Peter Brook, I believe the name is. And I like that movie quite a bit, even though it hasn't gotten the accolades of other epics of the 60s, such as Dr. Zhivago or Lawrence of Arabia and whatnot. But let's talk here for this hour about Lord Jim. And Kevin, you read the book for the first time over the past month or two. What can you give us your impression of the book?
Well, maybe we should favor our viewers with a short rundown of what the story is on this,
Yeah.
because it's important before I start my critique. I was hoping you would do this, but I'll just, in very broad brushstrokes, paint a picture of this. It's about a young man, uh, the title character, Jim, and he is a seaman, and he's involved in a an accident at sea with 800 passengers, and the crew panics. The crew being the captain and the first and second engineers. Jim is the sole officer under the captain. He's the first officer. There's this crew of four, as I recall, and they panic and they put out a lifeboat and they encourage Jim to jump into the lifeboat. And Jim knows that what he's doing is not right because you're leaving 800 people to their death. And but it does seem as if there's not enough time to get all the other lifeboats, even if they're insufficient. It's like the Titanic story. There's not enough lifeboats, but you could save some of the people by getting the lifeboats lowered and everything else. And Jim, in fact, at one point, he does start cutting the lines to the lifeboats. I mean, his instincts are brave ones, but then at the last moment, they in the boat already lowered, the captain and the two engineers. They say, "Jump, jump!" And this is his eternal moment. Is he going to stick with the ship, do his duty, or is he going to chicken out? Well, he chickens out. He jumps into the lifeboat. And the way that Conrad describes it, it's completely understandable that he would do so. I think most of us would have done so. Um, you could even make the case that it's being done under orders from your captain,
True.
if only tacitly. Here we are in the lifeboat. We're shoving off. Come on. I'm your captain.
Good point.
Well, here's where the story really begins. Uh, they're at sea in the lifeboat. When they finally come into shore, they discover that, to their chagrin, actually, that the boat has not sunk, that all 800 passengers have been saved, that they needn't have abandoned ship.
Yeah.
And then there's a tribunal. It's not a legal tribunal. It's a maritime tribunal. They have captains and whatnot sitting on the tribunal, and the three other officers, the captain and the two engineers, they skedaddle. Whereas Jim, he faces his accusers, and they decertify him. He can no longer operate at sea as an officer, I think is what it is. Although Conrad never quite tells us, it doesn't seem to me, and that's sort of my first little mini critique. We aren't always clear where we are in the book or what's happening, or at least I wasn't. And now Jim, he's been decertified, he's been shamed, and now he has to redeem his honor. And the rest of the book is about Jim trying to save face. And it's told in the person of a narrator that some of us, even if you haven't read Lord Jim, may be familiar with. If you've read Heart of Darkness, his arguably greatest work, published a year before in book form, Lord Jim, 1899, Lord Jim, 1900. We hear through the narrator Marlowe what happens to Jim subsequent to this event and how he attempts to save his honor. And I think that's enough for now. What I felt reading the book was, it was sort of deja vu, going back to my doctoral student days when I was very absorbed by the anthropology of honor in my study of German dueling in late 19th and early 20th century Germany. And that's how the book struck me, Lord Jim, as a novelistic treatment of the anthropology and the psychology of honorific groups. And what I mean by that is, in these worlds where honor is paramount, for example, among seamen, it is paramount at the expense of other status symbols that most of society pretends are important. Wealth, your class origins, your educational level, your intellect, beauty. I know this through my German duelists. I mean, these dueling societies and universities, the whole purpose of them was actually to get a Schmiss or two, couple scars across your face. So it wasn't about beauty, honor. What it's about, what it boils down to, is physical courage. And that equates with manhood, to really boil it down for you. And I was having deja vu as I was reading this book because that's what Jim had now to prove to his peers and to himself, that he wasn't a coward, that he was a man. And I liked the book for that reason. I felt that Conrad was grappling with something that at that time was very real. Today, it's become very attenuated, this notion of honor. We think, oh, guys, dueling for honor, what is that, you know? But it was a very real thing back then in that pre-war era, not only in Germany, but throughout Europe, even if they didn't quite duel in England or something like that. But I'll just say one last thing on this. Conrad was deeply imbued with a sense of his own honor. And there's even in this biography, I'll show it, it's the classic by Jocelyn Baines, an Englishman with the name Jocelyn, sort of like Evelyn Waugh. They give their authors female names for whatever reason. And
and what about Somerset? That could go either way, right?
yeah, I guess it could. But he even felt that he might have to duel on a couple occasions, Mr. Conrad, because he felt his honor had been impugned. One instance was where George Bernard Shaw, at an event hosted by H.G. Wells, they were all in the same clique there at the time, and Bernard Shaw had been making fun of Conrad's books, which I wouldn't dare to do, but I will be criticizing them. And Conrad, he asked Wells, he took him aside, said, "Is he insulting me? Is he insulting my honor?" And Wells said, "No, it's just humor. It's just his kind of humor." And then in a little addendum to the anecdote, Wells says, this is from his memoirs. Wells says, "Conrad never understood humor, English or otherwise," which made me laugh because that was going to be one of my critiques today. The guy has no sense of humor, but we will lead from that into my next critique. That's the hardest thing to do when you're writing in a language in which you did not grow up. All right. I know this because I live in Germany presently. I grew up in the English language. I speak fluent German, but the hardest thing is to crack jokes in a foreign language. The hardest thing is to be humorous. It's got to be real nuanced to hit the sweet spot. I think we all know this instinctively, even if we don't maybe speak a second language. And that is a critique I have of Conrad. Now, this is not a subject that you want to be ha-ha funny about, but there's not even any sort of sly humor. There's not even any black humor. There's irony, all right, and I would argue at the end, but that's not wit or humor. Those aren't Mr. Conrad's fortes. What are his fortes? Well, I will stop now because I think you probably liked the book a little bit better than I did, and I will let you take it from here.
Yeah, I like it a little bit more because I had a situation many, many years ago where I had a situation where I had to choose one way or the other, and it dealt with honor. I wrote about it, I haven't published it, and so that situation appeals to me. The dilemma of the man who had to make a difficult choice in a moment of crisis, and he's not sure if he made the right choice. Well, I guess in Conrad's case, Jim is sure that he made the wrong choice. He doesn't have any doubt. There's no ambiguity there, as there was
Right,
in my own situation.
right.
Um, I I admit that there's a lot of what you might call purple prose in this book, and I'm sure you'll extrapolate on that point because
I shall.
we did discuss this a few days before, and I know a lot of your opinion. You know a lot of mine. About the purple prose, I would say that what Conrad is an expert at doing is establishing atmosphere, establishing tone, kind of this impressionistic world where this very unimpressionistic thing has happened, and it gets kind of murky and hazy the way he writes about it. If anyone's read it, they might know what I mean. But I think the purpose of that kind of elaborate flowery prose is to establish an atmosphere, and I would argue, and a tone. I would argue that establishing atmosphere and striking a certain tone in the novel is what he's getting at and what he is expert at. Do you disagree or agree with that assessment?
I disagree because I think I agree with you that he's trying to uh, capture a certain atmosphere, and he does do that to a large degree, I will admit, in plunging you into another world immediately, which is often, almost always, um, my motivation for reading.
Yeah,
I want to be immersed in a completely other world. I want to escape my world, if you don't mind.
right.
And I want to be immersed in another world of whatever kind, but I'm particularly drawn to, and those who have seen our Jack London and Raymond Chandler uh, programs will know that I'm drawn to high adventure. I'm not an adventurer. If you had to categorize me, I'm just a sort of retiring scholar. And I like these tales of the high seas and all that. Well, Conrad is the genuine item, right?
Yeah.
We should maybe tell our viewers he was a sea captain, even. He was at sea for 16, 20 years. I don't know what, before he finally decided he wanted to become a writer and in English, although he was Polish. Okay, we'll get into that maybe a little bit more. The difficulties of writing in a foreign language, not even having to be funny in it, but just writing a sentence that a native speaker thinks, oh, that's pretty good. Mm, tricky, tough, tough. Not sure he succeeded in this book. And I think
Right.
I will now go on to my critique of his language, if you don't mind, Tim, if we may.
Please.
Okay. And now here I'm going to try and hoist Mr. Conrad on his own petard. Because there's a very famous aesthetic manifesto, as it were, that Conrad wrote. It's in a preface to a book, a short story, a long short story called The Nigger of the Narcissus. And that was the title of the story. I think it appeared in 1897. And he wrote a preface to it. And this preface is, you want to say something, Tim?
No,
No.
no, that's
Okay,
fine.
good. And this preface is often cited. I remember I first came across it when in the context of Fitzgerald and Hemingway, who had come across this, and they were, I think maybe it was an exchange of letters or just a dialogue that someone recorded between them at some Paris cafe. I don't know exactly, but they were taking this preface very seriously and considering the points. And there, I think you can boil this preface down. It's not long. It's about a page and a half, 2 pages, 2.5 pages. You can boil it down to, or at least I have, to this line where Conrad writes, all art appeals primarily to the senses, and the artistic aim, when expressing itself in written words, must also make its appeal through the senses. if its high desire is to reach the secret spring of responsive emotions. Okay, fair enough. I skip a bit. I'm getting to another passage. My task, he writes, which I am trying to achieve is, by the power of the written word, to make you hear, to make you feel. It is before all to make you see that and no more. And it is everything. Okay, I think it's safe to say that this is bringing it to its logical conclusion, this whole preface.
Sure.
It is everything. Okay, to see is everything. And by the way, I think he probably wanted to write above all. It is before all to make you see. Okay, maybe he chose before, deliberately, but I would argue that maybe he didn't quite get that word right. He should have wanted to say above all.
That idiom,
And the
yeah,
problem with the language, not the sentences are a little off in my view. Okay, so to see, let's read a passage of Lord Jim and see if we can see. And I agree with him. This is not just me hoisting him on his own petard. I agree with him. This is the point of literature. It's to create a clear mental image. Yes, I think I've said that in the past. It's not as if I'm making this up as I go along. This is what I believe. So let's see if he gives us a clear mental image. If he stays true to his aesthetic credo. Well, let me start with one passage, and I'm not choosing the worst passages. I'm not, and I will tell you why in a second. I'll tell you why in a second. I'm just choosing passages that are not great, but they're not the worst. Here is Conrad, and at this point, Lord Jim is in Borneo, I think, is where literary scholars say the action takes place, though he doesn't explicitly say it in the novel himself. I think we're in Borneo at this point. Lord Jim has become, sort of a lord, okay, of these Malay peoples, I think is what they are, their ethnicity. And it's a remote settlement in Borneo. There's not much white trader traffic there. Jim has come there in the guise of a white trader, but one thing has led to the next, and he has become sort of de facto ruler over these peoples in the hinterland, away from the coast, in this section of Borneo. Here is just a physical description that Conrad gives us. Try to form your mental image. I saw part of the moon glittering through the bushes at the bottom of the chasm. For a moment, it looked as though the smooth disk falling from its place in the sky upon the earth had rolled to the bottom of that precipice. Its ascending movement was like a leisurely rebound. It disengaged itself from the tangle of twigs. The bare, contorted limb of some tree growing on the slope made a black crack right across its face. It threw its level rays afar as if from a cavern, and in this mournful eclipse-like light, the stumps of felled trees uprose very dark. The heavy shadows fell at my feet on all sides, my own moving shadow, and across my path the shadow of the solitary grave perpetually garlanded with flowers. In the darkened moonlight, the interlaced blossoms took on shapes foreign to one's memory and colors indefinable to the eye, as though they had been special flowers gathered by no man, grown not in this world, and destined for the use of the dead alone. Now, you may say you have a clear mental picture from that. I don't. I just have like kind of a murky moon somewhere, shadows somewhere, tree stumps. I don't get a clear mental picture. There's another author who worked this same terrain. and his name is Somerset Maugham. Thank you, Tim, for the little teaser there. Excuse me. And I only recently read his complete short stories, just about 6 months ago. I just went systematically through them because they're great. He's a great short story writer, acknowledged great short story writer. And he also has a story similar to Lord Jim with the title Yellow Streak. Perfect. And it takes place in Borneo. Perfect. In the context of British colonialism. Perfect. And the yellow streak alluded to in the title is about an accident on the water where a young Britisher like Jim feels he has come up short in terms of courage. And I want to now read to you a passage, another descriptive passage, like from Lord Jim, and you tell me if there's not a clear mental image, or at least a clearer one than we got from Mr. Conrad. They had started at dawn. The river then was very shallow and ran clear and bright over a shingly bottom. The trees leaned over it so that above there was only a strip of blue sky. But now it had broadened out, and the men were poling no longer, but paddling. The trees, bamboos, wild sago like huge bunches of ostrich feathers, trees with enormous leaves, and trees with feathery foliage like the acacia, coconut trees and areca palms with their long, straight white stems. The trees on the banks were immensely and violently luxuriant. Here and there, gaunt and naked, was the bare skeleton of a tree struck by lightning or dead of old age, and its whiteness against all that green was vivid. Here and there, rival kings of the forest, tall trees soared above the common level of the jungle. Now, for me, that is eminently clearer, the image it gives me, than what Conrad gives me. Now, you may say, Kevin, I don't care about clear images. Fine. But all I'm saying is that seems to be what his desideratum was, and it is mine. And I can give another example, but perhaps you think I've been carrying on too long, Tim.
No, go. One more.
One more. I got two just to show you I'm not, just picking some terrible passage. And it wasn't even terrible. And
Right.
later, here's another one.
You said this one is from Conrad or Mom?
This one is from Conrad. I'm giving you Conrad first.
Okay.
And this is now Lord Jim. This is Jim before he becomes the Lord, and he's talking to Marlowe, our narrator. And Marlowe, because Jim never talks inside his head to us directly. It's always Marlowe sort of delving into his head and then taking it out and showing it to us.
Yeah.
So we'll take that on board. So it's a kind of a tricky dynamic there. I grant you. But however, this is a description by Conrad in the voice of Marlowe about Jim's mental state after he feels he committed this cowardly act, and what's he going to do now? Here it is. Okay. He drew quick breaths at every few words and shot quick glances at my face as though in his anguish he were watchful of the effect. He was not speaking to me. He was only speaking before me, in a dispute with an invisible personality, an antagonistic and inseparable partner of his existence, another possessor of his soul. These were issues beyond the competency of a court of inquiry. It was a subtle and momentous quarrel as to the true essence of life, and I did not want a judge. He wanted an ally, a helper, an accomplice. I felt the risk I ran of being circumvented, blinded, decoyed, bullied, perhaps into taking a definite part in a dispute impossible of decision if one had to be fair to all the phantoms in possession. To the to the reputable that had its claims and to the disreputable that had its exigencies. I can't explain to you who haven't seen him and who hear his words only at second hand the mixed nature of my feelings. It seemed to me I was being made to comprehend the inconceivable, and I know of nothing to compare with the discomfort of such a sensation. I was made to look at the convention that lurks in all truth and on the essential sincerity of falsehood. He appealed to all sides at once, to the side turned perpetually to the light of day, and to that side of us which, like the other hemisphere of the moon, exists stealthily in perpetual darkness, with only a fearful ashy light falling at times on the edge. He swayed me. I own to it. I own up. The occasion was obscure, insignificant, what you will. A lost youngster, one in a million, but then he was one of us. An incident as completely devoid of importance as the flooding of an ant-heap, and yet the mystery of his attitude got hold of me as though he had been an individual in the forefront of his kind, as if the obscure truth involved were momentous enough to affect mankind's conception of itself. That's Conrad. Not at his most obscure, by the way. And now we read it's the last reading, folks, so patience. And it's
No,
short. It's
good.
short. This is Mom now talking about his Lord Jim, his Britisher who feels he has committed a cowardly act on the water. A description of his mental state. But presently Izzard's mind began to work, and a pang of anguish on a sudden shook him. Campion was drowned. It was awful. He did not know how he was going to explain the disaster when he got back to Kuala Salor. They would blame him for it. He ought to have remembered the Bora and told the steersman to make for the bank and tie up the boat when he saw it coming. The Bora is a big wave that forms in rivers in Southeast Asia sometimes. And it tipped the boat, and that's where we had our big drama.
And Kevin, before you continue, did you not tell me that in this case, the guy who supposedly drowned didn't drown after all?
That's another Conradian element, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So but we're in the middle of the main character thinking that the guy has drowned because of his act of not going to rescue him.
Correct.
That's where we are. Okay.
Thank you for that. So, but it's good that you said it, because you see, I'm not choosing these passages at random. I'm choosing an exact parallel.
The parallels on them.
Of
Yeah.
a story, of a geography, of a context, to show you how it can be done differently.
Gotcha.
They would blame him for it. He ought to have remembered the Bora and told the steersman to make for the bank and tie up the boat when he saw it coming. It wasn't his fault. It was the steersman's. He knew the river. Why in God's name hadn't he had the sense to get into safety? How could he have expected that it was possible to ride that horrible torrent? Izzard's limbs shook as he remembered the wall of seething water that rushed down upon him. He must get the body and take it back to Kuala Salor. He wondered whether any of the crew were drowned too. Okay.
Okay.
Two different ways of doing it. You may like the Conrad way. I don't. I like the Mom way. It's a clear mental image. And this would seem to be what Conrad's aesthetic credo is saying. However, I will grant this. He never uses the word clear. All right. So I rest my case.
You know, another difference from Joseph Conrad to Somerset Maugham that I noticed in the passages you've read, and from my own reading of Conrad, I haven't read Maugham. Conrad seems to get into metaphysical ponderings much more than Maugham does. Is that a accurate view?
Oh yeah, I mean another author we can bring to bear is Hemingway. I mean, he's the anti-Hemingway. Uh, he Hemingway, you know, maybe he even invented it. This um, uh, this idea of writers, they should show and not tell. But that's Hemingway in a nutshell.
Yeah.
He doesn't do any metaphysics, no philosophical ponderings for Papa. He just gives us dialogue, action, and physical facts.
Descriptions
And
of landscape too here.
right, and very little telling, as it were.
Yes.
And there's a famous letter that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote to Thomas Wolfe in the 30s. Thomas Wolfe, not Tom Wolfe, of course, just maybe a reminder, though, for those of you who aren't quite up on their American literature in the 20th century. Thomas Wolfe, he wrote Look Homeward, Angel, and you can't go home again. And these are massive works. They're like 500, 600 pages. And Fitzgerald and he were having an epistolary debate about the best way to be. And Fitzgerald basically boiled it down to, well, Ernest, he said, Thomas, you are a putter inner, and Ernest is a taker outer. Well, I'm a taker outer. I mean, all of my novels are like 200, 250 pages. I have a modern sensibility in that way. And that modern sensibility is basically that you only use your prose should only be load-bearing prose. That is to say, elements that carry the action, that carry the character development, that carry the plot. That's it. We with our experience of the world, we will bring whatever we have to bear for the other stuff. We'll make our own interpretations. We'll philosophize on our own time. And but that's not Conrad. He's got metaphors layered on metaphors. He's got this uh, it's verbal saturation, and it's rhetorical inflation, and I don't like it. It's an old style of prose. Now you can appreciate it. I appreciate it to a degree, but uh, it's not my standard of what should pass for in the year 2025 good solid prose.
I was looking through some of our old videos. One of them was our first Jack London video. And I asked you about, I said, is Jack London as good as Hemingway? And you
Yeah,
said he's better than Hemingway.
yeah,
And you said one of the differences is Hemingway has a stripped down style of writing, as you've just mentioned, but London ponders the universe in a metaphysical way, and you seem to think of that as a merit on the part of London. What would be a demerit on the part of Conrad pondering the universe in a metaphysical way vis-a-vis London doing the same thing? Does London do that in a better way than Conrad?
yeah. I can follow it. I can't
You're
follow
able to
Conrad.
follow those
Yeah,
ponderings. Yeah.
I can't follow Conrad all the time. In fact, just before we got on, I went through this biography a little bit to remind myself of certain biographical elements that I might want to mention. The fellow who wrote this biography, this Jocelyn Baines, he was in touch with the Polish translator of Conrad. That is to say, this guy who grew up speaking Polish, he wrote in English, and then it had to be translated back into Polish. And the woman who did the translating work, she said, you know, his syntax and his sentence structure are very Polish. That's why I can't
Oh,
say he's a great English language writer. I mean, there are so many things that I could point to, and they say, "Oh, you're just jealous because you're defending your own language against someone you think is encroaching upon your precious um, uh, bequest." cultural bequest. There might be a little bit of that in my motivation, but when I don't do it, I'm not bending over backward to do it. I'm noticing that the language is awkward, it's strained, it's effortful. And he himself said in letters, I just got done reading them too. He said how punishing it was to write for him. Yeah, of course. It just doesn't flow, you know. He's having to check himself. He's got a dictionary on one side, and he's got the thesaurus on the other. He actually wanted to write a book with Ford Maddox Ford early on, uh, who was in this circle of Wells and Shaw and all these others, because he said it, Mr. Conrad, he said that he felt he needed assistance with the English language. This was like in 1998, 1999, right when he was writing Lord Jim and Heart of Darkness. Now, Heart of Darkness, which we come to now, I took a look at that because I didn't recall being upset with his prose with Heart of Darkness. Okay, and I'm cutting him breaks, folks. I picked out a good passage that I like to show you how he could write when he wanted to. Okay. Now, this is from Heart of Darkness. And I think Tim and I are going to be reading this and talking about it at some future date.
Probably next time.
I would like to do that because I looked at it and the prose is much sharper. It's much cleaner. And let me give you an example. Here's that clear mental image that I would like to have more of with Mr. Conrad. So this is Heart of Darkness. Here we go. This is Marlowe again. He's in Africa. He's going up the Congo River and to see Kurtz, right? And he lands briefly on
What
shore.
Kurtz is a general in the army who's gone haywire. Is that the description
No,
of
I think that's the Apocalypse Now version.
it?
Kurtz has maybe gone haywire, but he's not a general in the army. He's just he's working for the company,
Oh, there we
whatever
go.
that means.
That's right. I conflated it with
Right.
Apocalypse Now.
But that is the drama. It's the idea that he goes native, and that is the conflict at the heart of the Heart of Darkness. It's Conrad's preoccupation, just as sort of preempted a little bit with this notion of giving in to our savage animal instincts. And
And it also takes place in the Borneo. No, it doesn't take place in the Bornean jungles. It takes place
Africa,
in the Congo,
in the
right?
Congo.
But it's a
Okay.
similar setting.
Yeah, the Belgian Congo of King Leopold, who was the great exploiter of the black man
Yeah,
back then, at the turn of the
yeah.
century. And here is now here's Marlowe, our narrator again, just like in Lord Jim. His boat has landed and not they haven't reached Kurtz yet, but this is sort of midway between where he started out from and his final destination, Kurtz. Anyway, I read, a slight clinking behind me made me turn my head. Good sentence, Joe.
All right,
Good.
all
A
right.
slight clinking behind me, maybe. I get it. I see it. He continues on.
Okay,
6 black men advanced in a file, toiling up the path.
okay. I see it.
They walked erect and slow, balancing small baskets full of earth on their heads, and the clink kept time with their footsteps. Black rags were wound around their loins, and the short ends behind waggled to and fro like tails. I could see every rib. The joints of their limbs were like knots in a rope. Each had an iron collar on his neck, and all were connected together with a chain whose bites swung between them, rhythmically clinking. All their meager breasts panted together. The violently dilated nostrils quivered. The eyes stared stonily uphill. They passed me within 6 inches, without a glance, with that complete death-like indifference of unhappy savages. Behind this raw matter, one of the reclaimed, the product of the new forces at work, colonial forces, strolled despondently, carrying a rifle by its middle. He had a uniform jacket with one button off, and seeing a white man on the path, namely Marlowe, hoisted his weapon to his shoulder with alacrity. This was simple prudence, white men being so much alike at a distance that he could not tell who I might be. He was speedily reassured, and with a large, white, rascally grin and a glance at his charge, seemed to take me into partnership in his exalted trust. After all, I also was a part of the great cause of these high and just proceedings. A little irony there at the end, too. I like it. Or as Trump would say, I like it. I like it a lot. And that's great writing. Every syllable conjured an image for me. Beautiful. So he was capable of it. I'm
And
not
he
saying
wrote,
he could. I'm not saying he couldn't. But in Lord Jim, it just goes crazy. And it started out as a short story. I think the magazine was Blackwoods. I don't know. But it started out as a short story for a magazine, then turned into a serial. It started out with 20,000 words, became 140,000 words. Why? I don't know. Don't ask me. But he felt he had to maybe write a novel at that point and not just have a short story. But Somerset Maugham could have done it in this 20,000 words beautifully. And I'm sure Conrad could have if he had just knuckled down and put on his little Heart of Darkness writing cap, as opposed to this Lord Jim, this monstrous, I have to write a novel effort.
you told me, I think that Heart of Darkness came before Lord Jim, right?
Right. So he was
So
doing it
so
before.
so we
Yeah.
might say that there was a regression on his part in the tensile strength of his prose.
Right. Well, he talks about it in a letter. I mean, I'm taking all of this from his own words. He said that he was trying to, in fact, um, uh, in the words of John Keats, to load every rift with ore. Right? He was really trying to jazz it up in my language. He was trying to impress. Um, and just to show you what I mean by that, here he was. Conrad uses 4 words where one will do.
Mm.
Uh, for example, he departed, disappeared, vanished, absconded. I think we get the picture. I got to admit there, but we got it with the first one.
He disappeared.
He departed.
Oh, he
He dis
departed.
he
Yeah.
departed. He departed, disappeared, vanished, absconded. Another example of that. These aren't even adjectives. These are just verbs describing the same thing.
Right.
Uh, Here's another one. His uneasy eyes fastened upon mine, questioned, begged, challenged, entreated.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, Hemingway would have been perfectly happy with his uneasy eyes fastened upon mine. He wouldn't even have to put how they fastened upon his. We know it from the context.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
In fact, I even just to, sort of get my jollies, I wrote I wrote like a passage that Conrad would have written and then how Hemingway would have done it. So, and I'm giving Conrad a lot of credit, actually. I'm not going completely mad. So Conrad would have said something like he stood there oppressed by the somber and inescapable unconscious no, excuse me, I can't even read what I wrote. Take two. He stood there oppressed by the somber and inescapable consciousness of his moral abasement. That's something that Conrad would write, right?
That sounds
Here's how
Conradian. Yeah.
and here's how Hemingway would do it. He stood there. He did not move. We get it. You see, this is writing 101 in the year 2025. Okay.
Yeah.
And it just goes on with these examples. I mean, I'll give just one last one of these of this accumulation of verbiage for no apparent reason except to maybe up his word count for the magazine.
Right.
Uh, we have now, yeah. Oh, geez, that's horrendous. I won't even go into that. Here's one. I don't want to be labored, but I want to give you one more. Yeah. He thought he had been an awful brute somehow, and he felt remorseful, touched, happy, elated. He felt all those things. Well, I would have been happy with just he felt happy. Okay. Or elated, happy and elated. Fine. We don't need the next two. So, folks, I think you get the picture here. I like very much what Mr. Conrad is grappling at with this notion of honor, male honor, more specifically, courage equated with masculinity. And what do you do when you feel you have failed your own honorific conceptions?
Yeah.
What do you do? What now? I love those stories where they say, okay, what now, pal? All right. Yeah, you're in a fix. What are you going to do? And he does take us through to almost a logical conclusion to the dramatic premise, which is that Jim can't escape his past. He basically dies at the end of the novel because he has a moment of weakness where he recalls his own past, and he gives a guy named Brown, I think his name is, who's a real scoundrel. He cuts him a break, and then this Brown fellow takes advantage of it and kills some of Jim's peoples. And then Jim sort of at the end he sort of walks to his own death as a self-sacrifice for having failed his people. But the failure was because Jim was still haunted by his past. He had still not shaken off this feeling of guilt in this incident with the lifeboat.
Uh,
So, so Conrad really brings it around, I think. And a lot of it. One last thing, Tim. A lot of it reminded me of The Great Gatsby. I mean, I think Fitzgerald, because he was preoccupied with Conrad, he did take a lot from Lord Jim. Uh, you know, so here we are, boats beating against the current, what is it, driven ceaselessly into the past. That it reminded me of that at the end. And there are all kinds of other quotations in Conrad that had echoes in The Great Gatsby.
True.
For example, this fellow, what's his name? Stein, this
Yeah.
agent.
Stein is the agent
Yeah,
who
the
sends him over
butterfly
there. Yeah.
collector, the
A
entomologist.
naturalist.
Right. And he says on several occasions Jim is a romantic. And then there's like another passage where they talk about Jim's readiness. And it reminded me of Gatsby in that line in the novel about Gatsby's romantic readiness. And there are other flashes of Gatsby that I got, which I won't bore you all with, but the book's marked up with them. Reminded me of Gatsby. And of course, the name of Jay Gatsby was originally Jimmy Gatz. Jim.
Lord Jim.
Yeah. So I think I would be surprised if I didn't find out at some point that Fitzgerald was very much influenced by this book.
Okay, great points. We have about 5 minutes left. I just want to bring up two other aspects of the novel that I believe are significant and get your brief commentary. We have a shifting narrative viewpoint throughout Lord Jim, just as you know we do in Heart of Darkness. We have Marlowe narrating Heart of Darkness. Here we have Marlowe narrating some of Lord Jim, but other viewpoints thrown in there as well. And we even have a non-linear time scale because the book opens after the incident of the jumping of the boat, and we finally get into that later on. And it seems to me that with the shifting narrative viewpoints, you're bringing in narrators that pick up the story at earlier points or middle points and bring it up to the present. I mean, there's a lot of shifting narration. There's not a linear timeline. Do you have any comments about that?
Uh, I didn't like it, but I can accept it. Uh,
Okay.
he's he's trying to fancy it up. Uh, he's kind of doing a Quentin Tarantino on us. Uh, and I don't like Quentin Tarantino much, by the way. So
Okay.
it all sort of aligns,
There you go.
this aesthetic critique. But I can see why he's doing it. As I said, in his letters, he talks about he wanting to just really throw everything but the kitchen sink in terms of narrative technique and psychological penetration and
Gotcha.
a lot of vivid wordplay, although for me it just turns kind of gray and murky at a certain point. What I wanted to read, Tim, is something that speaks to you and how at very inopportune times, I would argue, Conrad gets all kind of metaphysical on us, right? He'll be going along perfectly well. It's like, oh, okay, right? We're like back to a kind of passage that I read from Heart of Darkness. Like, oh, he's going good. And it's like, then no, 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 no. He goes into his philosophizing. For example, there's this one passage where he's talking about the uh, the the daughter of a woman, and the daughter eventually becomes the common law wife, I guess you would call it, of Jim. And
A Malay woman.
it's a Malay woman. But we're talking about her mother and how the mother, her second marriage had been to this fellow named Cornelius, who was this evil Portuguese trader who eventually betrays a secret to this scoundrel Brown, which serves as Jim's downfall.
Okay.
And now here we are. He's talking about this woman. He goes, through her whole life, the wife of the unspeakable Cornelius had no other companion, confidant, and friend but her daughter. The daughter, again, Jim's common law wife. How the poor woman had come to marry the awful little Malacca Portuguese after the separation from the father of her girl. The father was some sort of white man. I don't know exactly the details, but he left. And how that separation had been brought about, whether by death, which can be sometimes merciful, or by the merciless pressure of conventions, is a mystery to me. Okay, we got through that sentence. I think we followed it. From the little witch Stein, again, our butterfly expert, who knew so many stories, from the little witch Stein had let drop in my hearing, I am convinced that she, again the mother, was no ordinary woman. Her own father had been a white, a high official, one of the brilliantly endowed men who are not dull enough to nurse a success and whose careers so often end under a cloud. I suppose she too must have lacked the saving dullness, and her career ended in Patusan. This is the fictional place name of this settlement in Borneo. Okay, that's all fairly clear. I know you listeners are just jumping in. It's maybe a little bit hard to follow, but it's clear to me and Tim, right? Well, here's where he goes off the deep end now.
Okay.
See if you can follow this.
All right.
So I'll read that sentence, that last sentence. I suppose she too must have lacked the saving dullness, and her career ended in Patusan. Our common fate. For where is the man? I mean a real sentient man, who does not remember vaguely having been deserted in the fullness of possession by someone or something more precious than life. Our common fate fastens upon the women with a peculiar cruelty. It does not punish like a master, but inflicts lingering torment, as if to gratify a secret, unappeasable spite. One would think that, appointed to rule on earth, I guess fate, it seeks to revenge itself upon the beings that come nearest to rising above the trammels of earthly caution. For it is only women who manage to put at times into their love an element just palpable enough to give one a fright, an extraterrestrial touch. I ask myself with wonder how the world can look to them, whether it has the shape and substance we know, the air we breathe. Sometimes I fancy it must be a region of unreasonable sublimities, seething with the excitement of their adventurous souls, lighted by the glory of all possible risks and renunciations. However, I suspect there are very few women in the world, though, of course, I am aware of the multitudes of mankind and of the equality of sexes. In point of numbers, that is, what that was, I have no idea. But now we get back to the narrative. But I am sure that the mother was as much of a woman as the daughter seemed to be. Okay, then we get back into it. That's nuts. That is crazy times here. This would get an F in a creative writing course. You say, well, Kevin, he's a genius. Not to me, he's not. He's just an ill-disciplined, non-native English speaker who's trying to show off, but the difficulty is too great for him to actually pull it off. He can't, it's like a gymnast doing a very difficult routine, and he maybe does the twists and the flips, but it's awful to look at. You know, there's no clean lines involved here. He
He
should have
doesn't know
lowered
the
the level. He should
fundamentals.
have lowered the level of difficulty. Just stick to the descriptions. Do your Heart of Darkness thing, the passage I read, and we're with you, baby, because you grapple with really compelling themes, and sometimes brilliantly. But there's just too much of this for me to give this book a thumbs up. I'm sorry.
All right, brother.
Yeah,
You, I hear what you're saying. I agree with most of it, if not all of it. And I'm sure the readers will have much to ponder here based on all that you have said and quoted with real evidence for the opinions you've been giving. So I appreciate that. I think next time we get together, which might be in a week or two, let's do Heart of Darkness. Would you agree to that?
yeah, but it's gonna be more like 2 or 3 weeks
2 or 3 weeks. Let's do
yeah,
that. We'll get back together. I
yeah,
really appreciate this. I'm glad we got back together on this program,
yeah,
and we'll end it here. So take care.
right. And just let me say one last thing. This is not a blanket condemnation of Mr. Conrad. It's not liking Lord Jim simply. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I would recommend, folks, and I don't even know if I'll like it the next time I read it. I've read it 2 or 3 times. I even taught the book, but that was many decades ago. I think it's safe to say that if you want to go to Conrad, you're dying to get your hands on some Conrad after you've heard this critically destructive review of him. Go to Heart of Darkness. I think that will come through for you. And if anything, it's short. It's relatively short. You can read it in several hours. And this is one last thing. That makes sense that Marlowe tells the story in a night. Guys sitting around with their rum punch or whatever they're drinking and listening to the story.
Their pipes.
Their pipes. This goes on forever. This could never be told in a few hours. And in fact, Conrad, in his preface to this, he likes to write prefaces, Mr. Conrad. He in fact says that was one of the objections to the book when it or first came out, I think, yes, as a preface some years later after it was first published, that there's no way Marlowe could tell this story in an evening. And I will just add one last thing. There's no way he would use this language. This is not spoken English. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Very good ending. I appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.
All right.
Ahoy, matey.